Good evening and welcome to the Labour leadership debate on LBC. The party's in crisis. Some say it's going through an emotional trauma. In the next 90 minutes, the four candidates fighting to lead Labour are here to answer your questions. Andy Burnham's been depicted as an archetypical flip-flopper. According to some of her colleagues, Liz Kendall is a Tory in disguise. Yvette Cooper stands accused of running a campaign designed to win by saying nothing at all. And if your heart is with Jeremy Corbyn, Tony Blair says you should get a transplant. Tonight, they're all fighting back and say they're ready to take Labour to victory in 2020. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call to get through with your questions. Text 84850, tweet at LBC and use the hashtag LBC debate. And as well as listening, you can watch in high definition on our website, lbc.co.uk. Now, none of the candidates have the slightest clue of the questions coming their way, including the questions that they have for each other in our Ask Me Anything rounds. The results could be very revealing. Well, OK, let's get on with it and go to our first caller. Isabel is from Corby in Northamptonshire. Isabel, what would you like to ask?
I was horrified how GAP voted in the welfare reform bill on Monday. This proves to me that Jeremy Corbyn is a man of hope, he's a man of trust, and he's a man of conviction and integrity. He's like a knight in shining armour to lots of people, actually. Does this prove that he's the only real candidate for change in this leadership election?
Liz Kendall.
No, none of us in the Labour Party want to see tax credits cut from low paid and poor families. But, you know, I thought Harriet Harman was right when she said one of the reasons why we lost the election was people didn't trust us with their money and they didn't trust us on welfare. And that actually, if we kept saying and doing the same things over the next 5 years as we did over the last, we'd have the same result. And we wouldn't be able to prevent the Tories doing things like cutting tax credits from working families. And I think we've got to set out an alternative, which I've done. I've said we should look at the £100 billion a year we spend on tax reliefs so that we don't have to go forward with the cuts to working tax credits that will affect 3 million people.
But isn't this why people regard you as Tory light?
No, because, you know, I believe we need a welfare system that helps people who can work to do so and provides decent support for those who can't. But we have to show how we would pay for it. That's what I've done on the announcement on looking at the tax reliefs, the £100 billion we spend on that, because we are the party of work. We want people to work and for them to be better off in work than they are on benefits. And we have to face up to this as a party. We've got to set out a credible position on welfare reform.
Andy Burnham, why aren't you Isabel's knight in shining armour?
Well, I am the candidate for change because I led calls for Labour to change its position. Harriet Harman originally said that we would abstain completely on the bill. And I said I couldn't do that because this was a bill which would put children into poverty, a bill that unravelled all of the things we did on tax credits to support people in work. And no, we didn't, because a motion was tabled which said Labour doesn't give the bill a second reading, and that was as a result of that pressure. But it wasn't strong enough, to be honest, Iain. I wanted it to be stronger. But the right thing to do in those circumstances, having moved the party's position, is then to not put the party into a great big rift and split the party, because, you know, that doesn't serve ordinary people if we have an opposition that
Andy,
can't stand up for them. You
know as well as I do that people don't like politicians who aren't consistent. You said this bill was unsupportable, and yet you didn't vote against it, and your support over the last few days has been leaching to Jeremy because of that.
No, unsupportable, and I didn't support it. And indeed, we voted.
You didn't oppose it.
We voted. And indeed, we voted again. Yeah, we did. We voted against the bill.
You abstained.
The amendment said this House declines to give the bill a second reading. That is voting against, Iain. But I've said I wanted the position to be stronger. But there's a bigger point here, isn't it, in politics? Leadership is not splitting the party. Leadership is recognising that you have to come to a position amongst yourselves. I personally believe that the party was in the wrong position, and I said that very clearly. But it would be wrong, in my view, to lead a rift in the party that then means the opposition can't speak up for people because it's so divided and it's fighting each other.
Do you regret abstaining now?
No, it was the right thing to do. In terms of not causing a rift in the party, I tried to move the party to a stronger position, but having come to a position and having moved its position, it was right to support it.
Isabel thinks that Jeremy Corbyn is the only candidate for change. On this issue, how are you the candidate for change, Yvette Cooper?
I think in order to be the candidate for change, you've got to be able to deliver change. It's no good just shouting about change from the sidelines. You've got to be able to win in order to be able to change things. You know, we saw anybody watched the 10 o'clock news on the night of the budget, and there was a woman who was crying because of the tax credit cuts she's going to be facing. We can't stop those tax credit cuts because we're not in government. So we have got to, I think, have a very strong campaign throughout the summer to campaign against the really damaging things the Tories are doing to families. But we've also got to be strong enough to win and to actually get rid of the Tories from government.
Do you understand the anger that there is in your party's grassroots over this, at the positions that the three of you have taken on this issue? I mean, I've got a few of the emails here, but we've literally had hundreds of questions on this particular issue from your activists. They, to put not too fine a point on it, are disgusted at what the three of you and indeed a lot of your other MPs have done. Do you understand the depth of feeling about this?
Yeah, and it's a complete mess, is the truth. And, you know, the fact is we did have a first vote.
Is that Harriet Harman's fault?
Well, look, you know, when we all have part of a shadow cabinet.
Well, you just called it a complete mess. That's pretty strong. Surely that mess is down to your acting leader, Harriet Harman.
I don't think it's been handled right, but I think we should be opposing the measures within this bill that are going to hit families very hard. You had this discussion with Andy, I think, showed the mess and tangle that we've got into about parliamentary procedure that has actually ended up just making everybody confused what it is we stand for.
Because people back at home, they don't get what Andy would call, or in fact what you all call a reasoned amendment. True. It doesn't mean anything, exactly. Does it?
It was a vote to block the bill. The truth is, if that vote had gone through, the thing that we all voted for was a vote to block the whole bill, to ditch it completely. So that was us voting against all of the welfare reform bill. But that's got completely lost in the muddle over the second vote, which was frankly a messy compromise to try and hold the party together, and it failed. Right. It didn't do that.
Let's go.
So what we've got to do now, over the next few months, I think, is campaign very strongly, not just against the tax credit cuts that Harriet's talked about, but also against things like the two-child policy, which I think will be really damaging for families with three kids who are going to end up worse off in work.
Let's go to Isabel's knight in shining armour, Jeremy Corbyn. Do you understand why your three colleagues here voted in the way that they did?
Yes, I do, and I don't agree with them. It's not complicated. The reasoned amendment that was put forward included specifically in it agreement with the idea of a benefit cap, a two-tier benefit cap, 23k in London, 20k outside. We've never had any benefit system before in this country that has different geographical points to it. I think that's quite a significant change. And a very interesting map The Guardian produced the next day showed that under the existing 25k a year benefit cap, it's mainly people in London and the South East that are affected. It's social cleansing of constituencies like mine because the rents are too high and the benefits are too low. And in the absence of rent controls, benefits have to go up. And so this policy will now affect much larger parts of the country. I think we should have just said quite clearly, we are against this bill because we know what it's going to do. Everybody is apparently against the bill. So why, as a party, there was pressure on colleagues to abstain, I think is a big mistake. I hope we've learnt the lesson from that, and I hope we will seriously oppose this bill and seriously oppose the direction of travel that this government has on welfare when you look at the levels of desperate child poverty and poverty in Britain today.
This idea that you are a knight in shining armour, do you not understand that in order to bring the books back into balance, there has to be reductions in the DWP budget? It's one of the largest budgets, well, I think it is the largest budget in government. So is there nothing that you think ought to be cut in the welfare budget?
There has to be a growth in the economy,
well, there is a growth in the
greater
economy.
Income into the economy and greater levels of collecting of tax for those that choose not to pay it at the present time, in order to make sure that those with disabilities, those living in desperate poverty, children of large families don't suffer. But actually, the best way of reducing the benefit bill is getting more people into work.
And that's exactly what the government has done, isn't it? Because employment is at an all-time high. We have 3 3% growth rate. I mean, I don't know if you're promising more than that.
Indeed, there is a growth rate of some sort, but the point I would make is that the large number of people working now are in part-time jobs or zero-hours contracts, so they have great difficulty in making ends meet.
Most of the jobs created at the moment are full-time.
There's 800,000 people on zero-hours contracts.
And some of them actually want to be, don't they?
I'd jump in on this point, though, because I think people listening, people watching need to understand that the three of us are in a different position to Jeremy. We're in the shadow cabinet. And when you are in the shadow cabinet, you have to play your part in having the discussion where a range of views are expressed, but then you have to accept that there has to be a position reached, and then leadership is important because then you have to hold to that position. Now, it wasn't a position that I agreed with, and I'm quite clear, as leader, I would oppose this bill all the way, and I would expect loyalty from the entire PLP in the way that I showed loyalty this week.
Let's just ask your colleagues, would you oppose this bill all the way if you were leader, Liz Kendall?
I would set out an alternative, and I think there's a difference.
Would you oppose it, yes or no?
Not unless we could show our own alternative, because people didn't trust us on welfare.
Okay.
They didn't trust us.
Would you oppose it if you were leader?
Yeah, if we can't get the changes that we called for, then yes, I would oppose it.
Okay, right, let's move on. Anthea is in Waltham Abbey, and she would like to put her question. Anthea, good evening.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
In 1997, even people who didn't vote for Tony Blair were a little bit excited about his government and what he might do. But now, whatever he says on any subject, people just want to do the opposite of what he says. So should Tony Blair take a back seat from British politics and keep quiet?
Well, before we get your answers, let's hear a quick clip of Labour's most successful leader.
In the next few years, there are some very tough things happening in public services, in welfare. People are going to feel very disenfranchised, very dispirited. It is easy and enormously tempting for the Labour Party in those circumstances to just become a platform for that protest. But again, we know what happens when that happens.
Andy Burnham, should Tony Blair take a back seat?
No, I think he's perfectly entitled to make his views known. He is our most successful leader of modern times, as you said, Iain. He won 3 general elections. He knows something about winning. He knows something about speaking for the whole country. So, no, he's got something to say. He also has made mistakes, as I'm sure he would recognise. So it's not all that Tony says, but we listen to what he says. But these are very different times that we live in now. And the Labour Party does best, I think, when it speaks to people's sense of hope, gives people inspiration, and that's what we now need to do in a way that we did back in the mid-1990s.
Well, when I first became aware of you in politics, I would have described you as the archetypal Blairite, and yet would I be correct in saying you've gone on a little bit of a journey since then, or would you say you're still a Blairite?
No, I would say that this is where you people in the media always get it wrong. I was loyal to Tony, but I was then loyal to Gordon, and I was loyal to Ed because I'm Labour through and through. I am a Labour man to my core. And you always like to say, "Oh, let's slap that label on," and this label, he's part of this faction. Actually, I take the simple view. Maybe it's a slightly old-fashioned view, Iain, that a Labour government of any shape, of any kind of composition is always better for the majority of working people in this country.
Even one led by Jeremy Corbyn. And I will always work and be loyal to a Labour government to sustain that. Would you be loyal to a Jeremy Corbyn-led government?
If that was the decision of the Labour Party, I would, of course, be loyal to the Labour Party and loyal to Jeremy, yeah.
Yvette Cooper, Tony Blair, whenever we hold phone-ins on this radio station, his name comes up. He seems to have become public enemy number one, particularly among Labour Party activists, which some of us find quite difficult to understand.
It's probably also the nature of Britain, isn't it? You build people up, we knock them down, build people up again, knock them down. I think that's part of the way in which they actually have a healthy debate in a democracy. I think that, the issues that everybody's talking about today is about how you win the election, and I don't think we do that by trying to rerun 1997. A lot has changed since then. The economy's changed, technology's changed, but also politics has changed. We lost votes to UKIP and to the SNP as well as to the Tories. We've got to reach out in all directions. But
So
the
what can you
important
learn
point, the
from
right
Tony
point
Blair?
the right point is that if you just get angry at the world, you can't change the world. We've actually got to be able to win power in order to be able to do things for all of the people who are relying on a Labour government. So many people that we're letting down if we don't win.
To win power, surely you have to inspire. And Tony Blair did that. I mean, very few political leaders ever can. Can you seriously look me in the eye and say that in this contest, you've inspired anybody?
Well, we've got a challenge to inspire people.
I meant you personally.
Yeah, well, and every one of us. And, I would love to inspire people about the high-tech digital jobs of the future, which I think is really exciting, about how we can compete with India and China again, be at the forefront of the digital revolution like we were at the forefront of the industrial revolution, how we have a childcare revolution, how we can stop families being stretched and strained to fit round work and instead change work to fit round family life, and how we can just, that historic mission of ending child poverty in our lifetime, so parents aren't forced to go to food banks to put a hot meal on the table. I think those are inspiring Labour things. Now, look, Tony Blair came in after Labour had been in opposition for a very, very long time, and people were desperate to be inspired. We cannot wait 18 years. We cannot leave children today to grow up their entire childhood under a Tory government. So we can't wait for that to provide that inspiration. So it's harder now, but we've got to do it.
But it is interesting that I talk about inspiration, and most of the things you talk about are actually negative things. You're not actually inspiring
high-tech jobs
people.
isn't. I just think that's about
fantastic everything
jobs.
That you said was negative.
Childcare revolution, so that parents aren't being stretched and strained and having their childcare costs grow through the roof, feeling continually guilty that they can't manage to get home in time to pick the kids up from school because they can't get part-time work that they need that's properly paid rather than just low-paid part-time work because it's the only thing on offer. I think there's a lot of positive things in there that a Labour government should be delivering.
Jeremy Corbyn, should Tony Blair take a back seat?
He's welcome to join in any discussion he wants to. I hope he...
Very decent talk for you.
Tony and I have never been close, as you've probably understood. We've had one or two differences of opinion, mainly over Iraq and private finance initiative in public services.
But you have been saying the same things more or less since 1983. You are very consistent on that. But hasn't the world moved on? And you've sort of stayed with the 1983 Labour election manifesto, which Gerald Kaufman memorably described as the longest suicide note in history.
I've been an MP throughout that period. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of being re-elected 8 times in my own constituency, and I'm proud of the support that I've received to do that. I'm proud of the things I've been able to take up in Parliament on human rights and injustice, and I will do that whatever my position. Have I changed? Fundamentally, I want a more equal society. I want a more peaceful world. I want respect for human rights. Fundamentally, I think we are a more unequal society than we were 30, 40 years ago, and I think these are the crucial issues that have to be addressed in this leadership campaign. But would you admit that you have more in common with that 1983 manifesto compared to Tony Blair's 1997 manifesto? Well, Tony Blair was elected on the 1983 manifesto just as I was, actually. We were both elected at the same time. If he was in the studio, I could ask him that question, but let me put it to you again. Do you agree with more in that manifesto than 97? Was rather short and rather vague, and unfortunately included within it accepting Tory spending plans for the first 2 years of an incoming Labour government. In accepting that, they went straight into the road of private finance in order to build schools and hospitals. We did get the new schools and hospitals, but by goodness, we aren't half paying for them now. Andy Burnham has said that he thought the last, the Ed Miliband's election manifesto was the best one that he's ever fought on. What would you say was the best one that you fought on? Because I think you'd say 1983. Well, there's been some good stuff in all of them, quite honestly. 87 manifesto, 92, 97. I'm not fudging it. 83 was a manifesto that was your dream manifesto. It was a very long manifesto, and if that manifesto was in front of us now, with the National Investment Bank in order to restructure industry, and National Investment Bank disarmament. Wait, I'm coming on to that. Okay. Which would also help with the funding of the structural problems of this country, the infrastructure problems. That's right. Yes, I am in favour of nuclear disarmament. I think you're very well aware of that, and I would rather we spent £100 billion not on Trident but in investing in high-tech engineering and high-tech jobs. Liz Kendall, Tony Blair, your hero.
Well, listen, he didn't just win elections. He led a government along with Gordon Brown that did amazing things. You know, a national minimum wage, maternity and paternity leave and pay.
But why do so many Labour activists forget all of that and they just concentrate on Iraq?
Well, because it was a very, very divisive issue in the party and in the country. And look, this country can achieve great things. Think of all our amazing talents, our creative industries, our world-leading science and biotech companies. You know, we have a great future if we can unleash the talents of all of the people in this country. And that's what I'm in politics for. I think your chance of fulfilling your potential and living your hopes and dreams should never depend on where you're born, what your parents did, your gender, sexuality, or the colour of your skin.
Right.
And we can achieve great things. And that's what we do when we're in government. This isn't just about, you know, I want us to win an election, not just for the sake of it, but because Labour governments do great things. So when Jeremy criticises the 1997 manifesto, I am really proud of the amazing things that did. It wasn't just that we won elections, we changed the country. We changed the country for the better, and I'll never stop being proud of that.
What would you have, if you had been old enough to stand in 1983? I don't think you were. Would you?
Well, I was 12.
You were 12, so you weren't. Was that a manifesto you could have stood for Labour on?
Well, it wouldn't have been my favourite manifesto, no. Partly, but and it wasn't successful, and it didn't set out. It didn't set out a. I believe in a country where the people can fulfil their potential. It's not just about.
You've said
what
that. Let's move on to our next question.
This is about a vision for the future, Iain.
Let's move on to our next question. Adnan is in Oxford. Adnan, what would you like to ask?
Hi there. My question is, why is Liz Kendall and all of her supporters Labour members? Surely they would be better off with the Conservative Party.
Well, short and sweet. Jeremy Corbyn, would you like to see Liz Kendall join the Conservative Party?
No. Liz Kendall's a member of the Labour Party. She's obviously very happy to be in the Labour Party and very active and makes a very good contribution. She and I do have some differences of opinion on the way the party should go, the role of the private sector versus the public sector. Debate in the party is something I've lived with all my life. We've all lived with it all our life. It is a pretty broad church.
Yvette Cooper, isn't this all about the fact that your campaign people, maybe Andy's, maybe Jeremy's as well, have been briefing that Liz Kendall is really a Tory?
No, because she's not. We're just talking about what happened in 1997 and the pride in the national minimum wage and in the things that the Labour government campaigned for and the Labour government delivered. And Liz has done a lot of work for the last 5 years on issues around social care, issues around older people. That's about Labour support for families across the country.
Andy Burnham, do you think that Liz is sort of behind the scenes a bit of a secret Tory?
No, I don't at all. I worked with Liz when we were in government. I worked with Liz in opposition. I think we both share the same passion for the NHS. And actually, we don't want to see this contest becoming, when we're all having a go at each other. I think we agree on a lot of things, all of us. And whatever happens, we will work together coming out of this for the good of the Labour Party, because that's what unites us. And there's far more that unites the people around this table than divides us.
Liz, how did it make you feel when you saw these newspaper stories that had clearly been planted by somebody? And we know what happens in leadership campaign elections. There's always people briefing this, that and the other. But, I mean, did it hurt you in any way?
No, because
you've been called worse than a Tory.
Because I know my beliefs and my heart and my values. And I do believe that we need to be a party that believes in sound public finances, because unless we get the deficit and the debt down, we won't get the money we need to invest in our public services. And I believe in, great schools in every part of the country. I think we should get away with these sessions with structures. I think we should be properly funding our armed forces.
We all do that. You see, this is where you all come out with these motherhood and apple pie things that nobody can really disagree with.
Because I've believed in those values, some have said you're a Tory, but honestly, if we allow the Tories just to take those issues for their own, the Tories will be in power forever. And I actually want to get Labour supporters who voted Tory to come back to us. We're going to have to do that if we're going to be in government.
Well, let's take a break from your questions for a moment and go to the first of our Ask Me Anything segments. This is where one candidate has questions posed to them by each of the other three. There are 4 of these dotted through tonight's debate, each lasting around 5 minutes. Now, the order has been drawn by lots, and the first to be questioned is Yvette Cooper. Andy Burnham, what would you like to ask Yvette?
Well, I'd like to ask Yvette. She might have anticipated this question, but I would begin by saying we both agree, Yvette, that Labour spending didn't cause the crash. But with hindsight, do you really think that we did nothing wrong and that we didn't let the deficit get too high?
Well, I've said, I think very clearly, I think the deficit we had a small deficit, and just before the crisis, that ideally would have been a small surplus. It would have been in surplus at that time. But I think the big difference between us is that what you've said, Andy, is that public spending was somehow such a big problem that it meant we were too weak to deal with the financial crisis when it came. And I just disagree with that, because we were strong enough to have the cuts to VAT to support the economy, the car scrappage scheme that stopped the car industry going bust. We're also strong enough to do the support for pensioners and to stop Royal Bank of Scotland going bust. And my fear is that what you're doing, I think, is sort of falling into a Tory trap here, that, instead of looking what happened with the deficit, which is actually that tax revenues didn't come in and there was a problem with that, is saying that somehow public spending, Labour's public spending on schools, on hospitals, on Sure Start was such a big problem before the crisis that you had to apologise for it. That's what you did. You apologised for it. That is falling into George Osborne's trap. That's what he wants you to say.
But my fear is you're saying that we did nothing wrong and everything was fine. Because if you're not honest about some of the things that you did get wrong, I don't think the public are then prepared to give you credit for the lot of things that you did get right. And that's the problem, isn't it? We looked like we weren't prepared to debate our economic record in the last Parliament, and we should have done. We should have been proud that we ran a strong economy for 10 years. But, there is a but, we should have acknowledged that the deficit did get too high in the middle of the last decade. Indeed, Tony Blair, I think, said that himself today, pointing to an independent study. So honesty is needed, isn't it? Because the public won't trust us again until we're honest about our past.
And the big thing that we got wrong was we should have had much stronger regulation of the banks, much stronger regulation before the financial crisis. Yep. And so we should have done that. But the trouble is that what George Osborne wants everybody to believe is that somehow Labour's public spending was such a problem, whether it was the schools, the Sure Starts, the hospitals, all of those things, that is the reason why he is making much substantial cuts now, 40% cuts that he wants to make now.
We should have been running a surplus.
Let me just finish first. Andy, let me finish first, and then you're very welcome to come in. Let me just finish first.
So therefore we made a mistake, you're saying?
Hang on a second, let me finish first. Because he wants us to say, he wants to be able to blame Labour for 40% cuts that he wants to make for ideological reasons. And the more that everybody in Labour says, oh yes, suddenly Labour's public spending was such a problem that actually a Labour shadow minister now wants to apologise for Labour's record. I just think that's the wrong approach. Sure, there were some areas where there was overspending, and I found £5 billion of waste which I managed to cut. But I will never apologise for Labour's investment in the health service and in Sure Starts, which we should be proud of.
Jeremy Corbyn, what's your question to Yvette?
Thanks, Yvette. One of the hustings, I can't remember which one, about 3 weeks ago, there's been 20 of these hustings, so none of us can expect to be remembering all of them.
You'll remember this one, Jeremy.
Somewhere.
Yvette, you made a really good statement about the role of the welfare state in preventing people falling into destitution, more or less the same language that I use frequently. And you talked about your own experience of it, and I thought it was really good. And so what concerns me is the policy that we seem to be falling into of saying that people who legally come to this country, legally work here, legally pay taxes, legally pay national insurance, if they get into a problem, which we could all get into at any time, they cannot access benefits for the first few years they're here. Don't you think it would be better and fairer if we said, once somebody's here, once they're paying as they are, all those things, they should have the same access to benefits as you and I have?
Well, we already have a system where people who come from outside Europe can't claim any benefits or support until they've been here, usually for at least 5 years. It's obviously different for asylum seekers and refugees. Well, hang on, it's different for refugees and asylum seekers, because it should be, because they, I think, it's different from immigration. But when people come to Britain from outside Europe, they don't can't claim any support. And I think if you were going to go and work in Spain or in Germany or another country across Europe, I don't think you would expect to be able to claim benefits straight away. So I think if people have been contributing first, that's a good thing, and that is fair enough. But I don't think it's right for people to be able to claim benefits straight away when they first arrive. I think that should apply for Brits going to other countries across Europe as well. And the reason I think it is because otherwise what happens is that all of these European countries all have an incentive to start cutting all of their social security support, and it becomes a race to the bottom between countries. We don't want that. We need to support that social solidarity across all countries.
Germany gives far more support to people anyway all the time, and in Britain we have a generation of unprocessed refugee cases. I mean, you're aware of this from your own
that's a nightmare.
They are living in destitution.
We have to let Liz Kendall ask her question. Liz, what would you like to ask?
What would you change from our last manifesto's immigration policy?
I think we need a much stronger enforcement on exploitation. So we did start to talk about the real problem, which is when people have come to Britain wanting to support their families, end up being exploited, end up being used to undercut local pay and jobs. And that also is bad for not just those who've come to transport their families, but also local workers who end up being undercut, and also the employers who end up being responsible employers who end up being undercut by those who are dodgy and are not playing by the rules. I think we should probably have gone much further in terms of how are you going to actually enforce that? Because talking about changing the law, talking about strengthening the law on the exploitation is absolutely right, but unless there's some way of enforcing it, nothing's going to happen.
Like how?
Right.
For example, the Gangmasters Licensing Authority was actually much too weak. We should have a much stronger enforcement. You could use local authorities with it. You could have a new enforcement mechanism across the country, but something that actually makes sure the rules are enforced, because otherwise nobody has confidence in the system.
Okay.
On the 7th of July, I was in Scotland at the Gleneagles Hotel, where we were having the major international summit, the G8 summit. And this was literally the day after we'd